I first heard about the Peace Camp in 1983. I was pregnant with my daughter that summer, and I was really tired, and I just didn't think that I could go there and participate and not be exhausted. And so I didn't go in '83, but then after she was born in March of '84, her dad left, and there I was with 2 kids and a wood stove and no central heat. And so a friend of mine, Marie McRae, who had wanted to go out to the camp, said, well, why don't we go out to the camp? So we took Arna with us in a tent, and we went for maybe 4th of July weekend in '84, and we camped out, and they were still filling the trenches for the water lines back to Amazon Acres. And so other people whisked away the baby, and I got to dig and sing songs in Spanish, because at that time the future was still hopeful for Nicaragua. And yeah, that was a song I learned filling ditches at the Peace Camp, was Nicaragua vencerá, El Salvador vencerá, Nicaragua vencerá, El Salvador vencerá, será libre, será libre, será libre, será libre. So we're singing this as we're filling these ditches by hand, which had been dug by backhoes. So that was really nice, and everything was just wonderful to be at the camp. So Arna was 3 months old and still nursing, so we went down to the demo, and I got hassled by the town's ladies that they were going to have my child taken away from me by social services because, well, A, I was breastfeeding in public, and B, I was at the demonstration with, my child, and that wasn't good for my child, et cetera, et cetera. So, and one of the ladies who hassled me the most at that demonstration was the woman who came and brought us cookies later on. I can't remember her name. So that was neat. And then the next year, I think I started coming to regional meetings, and Andrea and Julie asked me if I wanted to do the poster for the Mother's Day for '85. So I did that and got involved and kept coming to regional meetings, and eventually ended up being the keeper of the checkbook and the person that collected the money to pay off the mortgage and send the money to David in Buffalo for that. So it was a beautiful place for me to be. It really helped me at a hard time in my life to be there with women.
So how old was Lars at that point?
Lars was 5 when Arna was born. He just turned 5 after she was born.
And can you tell us a little bit about what his experience was at the camp? Or?
Well, he loved to come to the camp because he loved to be outside, he loved being in nature, he loved interacting with insects and sticks and rocks, and he also liked that everybody treated him like a person. So when we were in the meeting in the house and we were sitting in a circle, he was given a big can of crayons and paper to write on, and he would make pictures and come and explain to whoever was handy what he had drawn, and they always listened with interest and treated him like another person. And so I think his worldview was very much shaped by being on the fringes of consensus process as a child. The adult he turned out to be really shows that. So
can you give us an example?
Well, he went to the Alternatives Community School in Ithaca, which was founded on the principles of consensus process. When the school was very small, the all-school meeting decided by consensus everything that would happen at the school, all the rules. But as the school got bigger and the principal felt that consensus process was unmanageable for that size of a school, it took so long to make decisions and get things done, that they went to a democracy model where they would vote on things and majority ruled. And I don't even think it had to be 2/3 majority. I think it could be a simple majority. So in the gym of the school, there were certain tenets of the school painted up on the walls above the windows. And Lars felt that these tenets of the school were no longer being served by the way the school was being governed. So he went through the arduous process of, first there was a student committee, then it had to pass the faculty committee. He created a resolution to have those things painted out on the walls. So he took it through that, he got through the faculty committee, it got brought before all school meeting, it was voted on, and it passed by a majority. So the resolution went to Dr. Dave's desk, and Dr. Dave just, threw it in the garbage. It was never acted upon, which is exactly what Lars was trying to prove about what had happened to ACS, how far it had come from the way the school was supposed to be run. So when he graduated, the teacher that graduated him, the way they did it was a teacher got up and gave a speech about the child, and then they gave a book to the child. And the physics teacher puts his arm around Lars and he said, "Lars is the conscience of our school, and we will miss him." So, yeah, I think that dedication to principle of doing what you're going to say you're going to do, the clear integrity of making a decision intentionally with the input of all concerned parties, and then carrying it out is who he is to the core, and what's important to him. So he has zero tolerance for dishonesty or devious reappropriations of things. He just it's criminally wrong to him that someone would behave like that, to put out in the community, yes, our school is run by a democratic process, and then disregard the process when it suits you. That was something Lars couldn't stand. So yeah, it certainly informed his personality.
Do you have an outstanding memory of an action that you participated in at the camp?
Well, in let's see, in '85, I did CD. I went over the fence for Hiroshima Nagasaki Day. Someone was taking care of my children, so I came without them. And that was an incredible experience. I took nothing over the fence except the pictures of my children in the back pocket of my jeans, which I still have that pair of jeans. I can't fit in them, but I tore the knee of this one on going over the fence, and so I saved them. I always wore them for a long time. Still have them. So I remember being in the lockup there, and the soldiers would come in every once in a while, because they were like cages. There was a concrete floor, and it was just like being in a poultry cage. Tin roof building, concrete walkway, concrete cells with chicken wire in between. And they would come through because we were making too much noise and singing and hollering and saying stuff. So I took the pictures of my kids out of my pocket, and I'm showing it to this soldier. I think he was a corporal, and he's looking at him, and you could see he just was like starting to lose it. I said, "This is why I'm doing this. I'm doing this so that my children don't have to go to war, so my children don't have to die in nuclear annihilation." And he just turned on his heel and left because he couldn't deal with that, because clearly he had children too. So that was pretty great. 6 Minutes to Midnight was awesome. The rainstorm that we had, the double rainbow. I was a peacekeeper on that march, and that was really intense, having gone through the peacekeeper training just that day, and taking my duties very seriously. So we were up all that night, and I think there was also a bunch of women who did a Elegant Ladies for Peace thing at 6 Minutes to Midnight. They somehow, people made a giant, like a pyramid of bodies, and the women went in there and came out dressed in all these fancy Salvation Army clothes, gowns and purses and high heels, and went up to the Q zone dressed like that. And oh, it really freaked out the soldiers because they had guns, and there was the bright lights and the dogs, and it was very, very intense. They were I think, very worried that they were going to have to shoot these ladies in evening gowns. Because they didn't know what was going to happen. It was so scary for them, as well as for us.
Tell us what 6 Minutes to Midnight was.
It was a march at night. There was a song at the time saying there are 6 minutes to midnight until the nuclear clock was ticking down before we wiped ourselves off the planet. So the march started after dark, like 9 o'clock at the camp, and marched up the road, past the town barns, down this little side road, and to the Q zone, which was the most heavily fortified area of the depot, and people speculated that that's where there were nuclear weapons. I mean, there was, razor wire and bright lights and dog patrols, and interesting enough, people noted later that the guards there always wore long-sleeve clothing, even when it was hot, and there was some question if that had anything to do with any special non-regulation security that they might have going on there, if there was any kind of beams or infrared or light or something that they needed to be protecting their skin against. But it was all speculation on our part, but it was odd that they were always, fully suited up there at the Q zone. So it was a night action. It was scary. The townspeople, some of them had set up lawn chairs along the front yards of that last back road before we got to the Q zone. And I was never clear on whether it was they wanted to make sure no one was going on their property or they just wanted to be spectators. But it was weird in the pitch black, walking with flashlights out in the country in the middle of the night, to have people sitting on the front lawns in lawn chairs hassling you. It was so weird.
Did you have other experiences that stand out for you, whether it was actions or meetings or?
Well, I was there the first time I was at the camp. A whole lot of money had been spent on flyers for mailing, and it was discovered after they came back that the return address on the Peace Camp address, that the zip code was wrong. And there was this big consensus thing: do we send these out anyway, or do we throw them away because it cost us $250 to have these printed up? Or do women just want to sit down and cross out all the O's and put it in a 1? And I ended up leaving the meeting because, I hadn't been exposed to consensus process all that much at this point. This is my first time at the camp. And there were a couple of women who were very invested in one solution or the other, and who were really interested in grandstanding and drama. And I felt like they weren't willing to let the work actually get done. They were just enjoying being hysterical about their viewpoint. Because to me it didn't seem like such a big deal that to get on the verge of tears over whether or not you were going to cross out the zip code on every piece of mail or not. And so I had the baby with me. I left. I went and found a shady spot, nursed her, went and helped make dinner. I was like, but later, being involved in regional meeting and things that I thought were of more impact in the encampment, and it was later. It was when there were fewer women there. I mean, in 1984, there were probably 250 to 500 women there that summer, but each year successively it got smaller, and the smaller the numbers, the more manageable the process was, because people couldn't agree to disagree, or there just wasn't that much divergence of opinion. There was only a few things to make a choice between and to make compromise over. But it seemed like the more women there were, the harder it was to get things done. I think we got better at it. We also got older. We got more mature. The women who were there for an eco trip tended not to be the women who showed up anymore. I don't know. I don't really know. But I had experience with consensus process in a smaller group when I came, because I was part of the Handwork Crafts Cooperative in Ithaca, and we had between 10 and 16 members, and we made all decisions for our store by consensus, and rigidly by consensus. I mean, after I left the store, they did go to a democracy model, but at the time I was involved, it was consensus. So I was very devoted to it. I was delighted to see the attempt to create a self-governing body of women ruled by consensus. But it was a great experiment. It was really neat. It was very powerful to be a part of it. When I first came there, I had a new baby, then I had a 1-year-old, then I had a 2-year-old. So I was always interested in helping out as much as I could, and I was grateful to women who were willing to take leadership roles, because there was a lot of hassle that went with that, people calling other people clipboard ladies and behind people's backs and stuff. But I was just glad that they were willing to do it, because somebody needed to do it. Somebody needed to kind of guide the flow. There were things that were a higher priority to get things done, like paying the electric bill, or things that if they didn't get done, things would be extremely inconvenient. So somehow women who took a leadership role made sure that those things happened, and I was glad that they were doing it. It wasn't something I was at all interested in, but I was glad that they were willing to do it.
What was a clipboard lady?
It was what they called the ladies with the clipboards, who had, this meeting's going to be at this time, and the people who filled out the chalkboards, that all these things were happening at this time here and there, and went around and sent singers out to get women to come for the various things. Do you remember that Women Come song? Where,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Women come.
Women come and form, join our circle forming. Tears we're shedding, laughter sharing, celebrate our strength. So 2 or 3 women would go around to clusters of women who were doing whatever they were doing when it was time for a meeting or a meal. And that happened in the beginning, but as it got to be, 20 women on the land or 5 women on the land, that didn't have to happen anymore. There was no more clipboard ladies. But when there was a lot of women, there needed to be communication, and someone needed to set the agenda, those kinds of things.
Can you talk a little bit about, as time went on, why there became fewer and fewer women?
I don't know. I think that, witnessing 83 and living in Ithaca, which is not that far away from the encampment, and seeing what very minimal media coverage the encampment got, even just 45 miles away in Ithaca, I think women didn't know about the encampment. I think that things like Michigan were an annual renewal of women telling other women about the encampment, but I think there wasn't a way for women to find out about it. I think that it was partially new women didn't come, and women who had been there before were carrying their experience from Seneca on. They were spreading it on in their lives. They were behaving in ways, in transformed ways, as they were interacting with the patriarchy, as they were choosing what to do with their lives, as they were interacting with new women that they met. They were impacting. It was, like if there's ricochet action, something bumps something and it goes off, and so like the concept of carry Greenham home happened definitely at Seneca, and every woman who ever was there took some of Seneca, even if she had a negative experience, where she went, and that change influenced the flow somewhere else. So I think that continued to happen, but you just never saw the glamour. I mean, Bella Abzug never came back to the encampment, you know. They're just, there was the big splash, and then the media coverage died, and I don't know. I think that was part of it. And then later, we actively told women not to come because of the zapping. We said, it's probably not a safe place for women with children, women who are pregnant, planning to be pregnant, think they might be pregnant, that it's physically a possibly harmful environment because of the government testing their electromagnetic weapons on the women at the camp. So then we were actively discouraging new women from coming. There were some feeder colleges like Oberlin. We had lots of young women coming from Oberlin. And so the women had heard about it, were coming through, but just not to the extent that it had been before.
Could you talk a little bit about your connection to Coral, which was the group that began to study the microwaving?
The Committee of Rainbow Light. It started sort of as an affinity group of women who were intellectually curious and concerned enough to make a commitment to investigate what the possible electromagnetic weapons were that they were using. And we used to meet, I think we started meeting once a month. And at first we met at the encampment, but it seemed that the zapping was particularly intense and we couldn't get anything done. So we started to meet in Ithaca and other locations. And this was before the internet, before listservs. Everything was done so painfully slowly. We would, you know, physically look up articles in libraries and then photocopy them and bring the hard paper copy to the meetings and hand them out to everyone, and everyone would read them and was out with their ear to the ground trying to find someone who would loan us testing equipment so we could test for the various frequencies and spectrums of energy that might be present on the encampment. Yeah, it was a powerful group. I mean, we decided, I remember one evening we were in the courtyard of the Annabelle Taylor Law School at Cornell, and it was sort of a closing of a very difficult day. Some of the women in our group were having really bad health problems, and some women were being zapped in their homes, and zapping had been stepped up at the encampment to the point where it wasn't really possible for SAR to live on the land anymore. So we were all in a circle and we were singing and holding on to each other, and realized that we had essentially pledged each other our lives and that we would do anything we needed to do to save one of the sisters in the circle that was in danger. That each of us was that committed to this cause that it was very intense to belong to this group. And that was a scary and beautiful and amazing feeling. It must be what it felt like to be in the resistance during World War II, you know, to be in the underground against an invading power, to have people that you just trusted that much, that you would lay your life on the line for them to continue the work and to keep the group safe. It was very, very powerful.
Can you give us the time frame and then also describe what zapping was and what you understood about it at the beginning of that process, and then what you came to understand about it?
At first, zapping was just women comparing notes of what had happened to the women at Greenham, and then the physical symptoms that women were feeling on the land. And are we paranoid? Could this possibly be happening? Could any government be so evil as to test new weaponry on its own citizens? The answer to that was yes. Clearly they had the encampment bugged so that it was just like a lab, They could turn it on, we would react, they could make a little note of, you know, what happened when they turned the dial up to 500 or whatever. We were, you know, the perfect caged lab animals there on the land for them to test on. So as we did our research, the British had a catalog of weaponry through the Ministry of Defense, and this was one of the best pieces of information that we had for what kind of weapons they had and how they worked. And the one that we determined they were using, for instance, at my house when we were having meetings there, was something called a squawk box, which was a beamed sound weapon that projected both a very, very high frequency above normal hearing for humans and a very, very low frequency beam of sound, strong enough to penetrate glass, directional, and it causes the symptoms of nausea, mental confusion, headache, disorientation. And the particular meeting that we realized that it was being beamed at my home, we were joking that anyone that was sitting in this one rocking chair, that the rockers had been cut off because they were broken. Anyone who was sitting there was getting a little cranky and tired and not feeling well. So I think it might have been Cindy said, well, just for shits and giggles, let's just try every 5 minutes. We'll just rotate one seat in the circle. If whoever's sitting in that chair isn't feeling well, then we'll know that yes, indeed, they are zapping the house. But also my children started to pick up on it. They could tell because that particular window was in the living room. But if you were standing in the kitchen at the doorway next to the telephone, you could walk in and out through that beam. You could feel it. And so then they started asking me questions. Is it turned on today? And I really started to get upset because it's like, it's one thing for me to put my life and my physical health on the line, and it's something else for me to endanger my children. So we stopped meeting in private homes after that. What we would do is we would all get together at a restaurant or something and have breakfast, and then randomly just drive somewhere and have the meeting, you know, either outside, or one time we were in one of the meeting rooms at the Tompkins County Library. One time we took over that restroom in Annabelle Taylor Hall. One time we were in a classroom somewhere on the Cornell campus. We just would go someplace where we could have a table and spread out, and it wasn't decided ahead of time where we would be, so that there was no way that they could get there ahead of us and set up their equipment. I remember clearly, we went down to Gail Walker's house the end of March, early April of 1987, and at that point we had information back from Greenham, and women were starting to talk to each other enough to start to corroborate what was going on. Somewhere in that time frame I was present in the pit when whatever it was bzzzt, Woody in her ear and made her whole side of her face turn red. That was probably the following winter, so the end of 87 into 88. It got down to very few women living on the land, 2 or 3, and trying to think, the summer that Jane and I got so badly zapped when we were there to take care of the garden, that was probably in 87 also. They had, at that point, we were discussing, they had those little metal mushrooms that were on the ground every X number of feet along the other side of the fence. So when you went back to the fence, you were no longer greeted by a vehicle driving up within minutes. They just didn't come at all. Jane had never been to the camp, and she had never been to the back fence, so we worked in the garden for a little while. We weeded, we watered, we nibbled on a few veggies, and then we went back to the back fence. So we went back through Amazon Acres, past the shitters that I think were never finished, past where the car was that the boys wrecked on us. And through the path into the woods and back to the mowed area by the fence. And I noted to Jane that it was really odd. This is the first time I had ever been back to the back fence where no vehicle full of guys didn't instantly show up to hassle us. We didn't see any sign of any military life at all while we were there. And then we both started to feel a little strange, a little queasy, lightheaded, and we were communicating back and forth with each other. I don't feel so good, me neither. And then it just got more and more intense until we felt like we couldn't move. I felt like there was a tiny little bitty voice way in the back of my head cheering me on that would say, okay, Laura, pick up one foot. Very good, all right, good, you did it. Now put it down in front of the other foot. Okay, yay, you did it. Now see if you can do it with the other foot. Okay, good, but you can do it. Put it down. And so as we got step by step away from the fence, gradually our will over our body came back, and we were able to command ourselves to run, and we started to run, and we ran all the way back through the second half of the woods, through Amazon Acres, all the way back to the house, because we were terrified. It was probably the scariest thing that ever happened to me in my life, to not be able to do what I wanted to do, to have my body be completely unable to obey my mind. And to have that portion of my mind that was in control be so small and so weak that it was like from way far away, way deep in my mind, I was telling myself to do this, because the rest of me was like a stone, just like made of rubber, just still, stiff, unable to move. So it was really scary. And we went inside, we wrote down our experience in the zapping notebook, put it back in the file drawer, went outside, laid in the hammock for a little while, tried to motivate ourselves to do the garden a little bit more, and it was maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We drove back to Ithaca because we were freaked. And we both went home and went to sleep and slept through to the next morning. I mean, we went to bed at 6 o'clock at night because we were wiped out. It was just exhausting, physically exhausting to have gone through that and to be so terrified.
Did Coral find support from or validation from scientists?
We did make contact with one guy, Dr. Charles Becker out of Syracuse, who was a orthopedic surgeon who had done a lot of work with returning Vietnam veterans, and his specialty was the healing of bone fractures that refused to heal. And he was searching for ways to promote healing, and was experimenting with electromagnetic fields. And in his researches, he started to believe that the electromagnetic fields that are present more and more in our everyday life, from power lines, microwaves, other forms, other wavelengths, were getting pervasively more dangerous, and that it was a public health danger for people to be exposed to these. He testified before Congress to that effect, and for his trouble, he lost all his funding and was unable to work anymore, and became extremely bitter. He wrote a book, The Body Electric, which various attempts were made to keep it out of print. It went through one printing and then is now out of print, and I've really never tried to buy another copy. I do own a copy which I loaned to someone, which I hope I can get back someday. And in it he spoke about the human body and electromagnetic fields, for good or for ill. So we were in touch with him, but he was at this point very reluctant to go on the record or speak too much, because he was feeling very intimidated by the military and the government. They made a couple of other contacts. They actually went to New York to be pre-interviewed to go on 60 Minutes. And because we didn't have any corroboration from meters, we didn't have anywhere to test the levels of the electromagnetic fields at the camp, they didn't think it was enough of a story to put it on, and that's what they told us. I mean, it could be that they were told not to put it on the air, but we started to feel really paranoid. I mean, when you're living in your home and stuff's being beamed at your house and your phone is tapped, I mean, I had bizarre experiences, like picking up my phone to dial out and hearing somebody watching football on my phone. Or picking up my phone and hearing a conversation I had had with someone else the day before being played back over my phone. I just started to feel crazy. I mean, I was a Cub Scout den mother at the time. I was a person that really believed in the freedom of speech, and I believed that it was my legal right to inquire about this. It was my legal right to protest if my government was doing wrong, and to be terrorized in my home, to be threatened, to have a possibility of losing my health or my life because of my commitment to what I thought was my right as an American was just devastating to me. I felt like I was cracking up. So we continued to do the work, but we felt we couldn't get the word out. We felt that people thought we were crazy. I mean, when I started to talk about zapping to people even in the alternatives credit union community, people would kind of roll my eyes like I was talking about, well, I saw a UFO. So I just came to not tell people, unless there were people I really trusted, about it at all, because I came to feel I wasn't believed. I came to feel that people thought I was nuts, paranoid. So yeah, the choral eventually disbanded, partially because of the devastated health of some of the members. They couldn't even lead their normal lives. They couldn't work. They couldn't do much more than sleep and eat and hope to feel better someday.
What was the time frame of the ending, and tell us more about how they were ill? What were the symptoms?
Okay, very similar to what's commonly known today as chronic fatigue syndrome, needing to sleep for 15 hours, waking up being absolutely exhausted, unable to drag yourself out of bed, nausea, irregular bowels. I'm not sure if they had their blood tested, whether they had a high white count or not, but symptoms similar to anemia, just extreme physical weakness, aches and pains, heaviness of the limbs, general fatigue, unable to sometimes do the simplest tasks without needing to sit down afterwards and rest. So yeah, to try to hold down a regular job when you can't even like make yourself breakfast is devastating. And these are, healthy women in their 20s and 30s, that, physical athletes, kibbutz girl, just struck down as if they had had a stroke or something. It was very scary. And even those of us who didn't have intense long-term symptoms like that, for instance, I found that I became extremely sensitive to high-pitched noises. Like, I couldn't be in a car when someone was tuning radio without covering my ears, because the sounds that a radio makes when you're between stations was so bad, it hurt my teeth so bad that I had literally screamed to people, stop that, don't touch the dial. I was hypersensitive to high-pitched noises. One time, Sarah and Woody and I went to a conference in Florida, to a Mobilization for Survival conference. It was a group based in Albany that was other peace-oriented groups, and we thought that we should tell them about zapping and that they might also be targeted. When we first got there, we were feeling a little paranoid because we thought our cabin was being zapped, and we just kept walking around because we could all hear this humming, buzzing noise. And we finally realized that what we were hearing was the breaker box in our cabin. We could hear the hum of the electricity. That's how sensitive we were to it. So I think those things have faded over time. I don't have the same problem with, radios being tuned. It's still uncomfortable to me, but it doesn't make me want to scream. I think there are long-lasting effects of being exposed to this stuff, and who knows in terms of, prevalence of cancer or brain cancer or other long-term changes made in a person's body from being exposed to these fields. It's unknown.
And of how many women were involved in Coral and how many experienced these symptoms?
I think everyone experienced the symptoms to some degree or another, but some women were more exposed to it than others. And I feel that the women that were zapped in their homes were felt to be a greater threat. So they may have had a bigger dose. I mean, to my knowledge, whatever I experienced at the camp and the squawk box at my house were all that I was exposed to. So I was able to go about my regular life, but the women who were living at the camp really needed long recovery times. The people who were frequent visitors to the camp, like Cindy, has still a susceptibility to electromagnetic fields. She's had a couple of incidences where she's been completely weakened and unable to function because she was within the range of a over-the-horizon radar or power lines. Physically, her body still had the memory and tuned into those things. So I'm trying to think of how many women there were. There were perhaps 10 at the most that were in Coral, and that membership was not consistent. Not everyone could make every meeting because some women were coming from far away, particularly Philadelphia. And then, some women just dropped out, were unable to participate anymore. So yeah, maybe 10 at the most, and then faded.
When was it that Coral disbanded this?
I know I still had Coral paperwork in my house through '93 because I moved in '93 and gave over boxes of stuff. And somewhere I have an article I wrote for Sprouts, which was the Community Self-Reliance Center newsletter in Ithaca, and that has a date on it too. It was within the 80s. I think by 89 or 90, I think we had given up.
Do you feel like the camp was still being zapped at that time, or have you been back where you, at some point where you
the last
felt it
couple
wasn't?
times I've been at the camp, I haven't felt like it was being zapped. But during the Coral times, I didn't go to the camp much. I was afraid to. I hated that feeling of feeling sick there because the camp was such a powerful, affirming place for me. It was a place where I was completely freely myself, and to, I don't know, have that spoiled by someone beaming evil at me was heartbreaking. So I didn't go to the camp that often after the zapping became really intense.
Could you talk a little bit about spirituality at the camp?
Well, it was very wonderful. Everyone's degree of involvement with spirituality was respected by everyone else. So you could be as witchy or not, and whoever you were and how you related to the world, to the powers, the elements, the forces, the angels, the goddesses, whatever, however you related to that was your business and it was okay. There was no proselytizing, no one leaning on anyone in any way. There was always a willingness to share, a willingness to allow women to apprentice, to allow women to participate to whatever level they were comfortable or not. And that was a beautiful thing. And the power in the land was so intense. I mean, going to the, they call them witches' circles, but the little areas back in the woods next to Amazon Acres, and then where the sweat lodge was, in between the backfield and the house. For me, as a kinetically related person, walking in those places was physically charged. I could feel the energy flowing up into my body through my feet from those places. I could feel the energy in the air all around me, like little prickles on my skin, where a woman had hung something beautiful, made an offering in the tree. It was almost like I could almost hear a little doo-doo-doo-doo in my brain, to be in the presence of this magic. The place was charged. It was full of beauty. It was full of the love of women, and it was a palpable presence to me. And that's how I related to it. I did some ritual on the land. I was there one night for a very powerful, and it almost became scary ritual because it got a little out of control. Someone was calling out to the Holocaust survivors to come and join the circle, and that was very powerful and very scary. But it all came out well. It all came out well. We were there for each other, and we managed to bring enough safety to the space. And where that came from, how I knew that I could bring the safety there and spread it over us, I don't know. That's something ancient, something within me, something that the power in the land and the other women just informed me how to help. And that was a beautiful thing. It was a very sacred place, the land was. Yeah, it was a beautiful place to be and to grow and to share with my children. My daughter was totally not into the peace camp. She didn't like being there. She didn't like dirt. She didn't like outside. She didn't like to use the latrine. She refused to use the latrines. I had a potty seat in the back of my Valiant that I used to take and put on the ground behind the latrines in the front there, and she would go, buck naked and sit on her little potty chair and pee, but she would not go into those latrines because she couldn't stand the smell of it. And one day, because she needed to pee, and we were going back to Ithaca after a regional meeting, it was winter time, but she wouldn't go. So I set her in her car seat, got her all belted in, and she pissed in her snowsuit and rode all the way back to Ithaca soaking wet because she would not use the latrines. So yeah, it was interesting that, Lars was totally a peace camp boy and was actually upset when he got too old to go to the camp anymore. And Arna, when she didn't have to go to the camp, that was fine with her. She would be more than happy to be babysat by someone and stay in Ithaca and, put on her ballet dress and twirl around on wall-to-wall carpeting and be inside and no bugs. And yeah, it was odd, very odd. I think he just understood that it was women's space and that children were allowed and that boys 12 and older were considered men. But he didn't challenge or question it, which is interesting in the light of how he challenged and questioned everything else in his life. But he just respected the rule and was sad about it, but, didn't fight it or, create an action around it or anything. He just was sad, I'm sorry I can't go to the camp anymore.
Were there other kids for him to relate to at the camp?
Not really. The children were more in Arna's age bracket, the babies and the toddlers. I remember there being this little plastic ride-on lion that was an object of contention because only one person could really ride on it at a time because the back seat part of it was missing. And there was another little girl around Arna's age, and each of them wanted to ride on the lion, so they had to take turns riding the lion back and forth in front of the front porch and up the ramp, and yeah. So, but there weren't really contemporaries for Lars there at the time that I was involved. I imagine there were a lot more children around in '83 than in '84 and afterwards.
Could you share a favorite song?
I have a lot of songs that I remember, and many of them are my favorites. It's been really wonderful to be here with the women at my home and to get together last summer because we did a lot of singing, and I sang, even with my blazing headache, I sang all the way home from our meeting last summer. And last night as I was falling asleep, I was lying in my bed singing, and women were singing. There isn't just one favorite. They're all favorites. So what's coming up? We all come from the goddess, and to her we shall return like a drop of rain flowing to the ocean. Woman am I, spirit am I am the infinite within myself. I can find no beginning and I find no end. All this I am, pretty goddess, woman, spirit am I am the infinite within myself. I can find no beginning and I find no end. All this I am. Yeah, singing was such an important part of my personal empowerment because as a child I was told not to sing because the other people in my family had much better singing voices than I did, and my sister actually told me, "Oh, shut up, you can't carry tune." So I didn't really sing until I was in my 30s, and then finally around the time I turned 40, I'm like, if I'm going to sing, if people are offended, that's their problem. And that was really good for me to just come to grips with it. I thought it was a women's encampment. Didn't know there was a sexual orientation piece. It just so happened that every woman that I seemed to meet at the peace camp was a lesbian, but I was still a woman and I was still there, and I still loved being who I could be. I loved walking onto that land and not having to edit who I was for the surrounding community. I just was who I was. I didn't have to not whistle. I didn't have to not shout. I could curse or swear if I wanted to. I could just be who I was. I could just be. And so that was such a great gift for me. And I met so many wonderful women there, and some women I was attracted to. Some women I thought, well, if it was a different time or space, I might be lovers with them, but it just didn't happen, and it wasn't what was happening then. But it was a wonderful place to be. Yeah, it was sweet. It was very sweet. I felt very embraced, particularly in the aspect of motherhood. I felt so much support from the women there. I didn't even know who had children and who didn't have children, but people were always willing to help out. Like if I went, this was a really hard experience for me. When I was the Cub Scout den mother and I was a divorced woman in the little rural town where Lars went to school, if we went to say the Blue and Gold dinner, which was a Cub Scout potluck event, I would be there with a baby on my hip trying to balance my plate and get some food for her and go through the line, and no one would help me. It was like I had leprosy or something. No one would help me. There was one other mom who was the mother of one of the boys in my Cub Scout den who came to my aid and helped me, but everybody else just avoided me like I was a pariah. Now, when I was at the camp with the baby on my arm, people would offer to take her, they would bring me food, they would make sure I had something to drink. It was exactly the flip side of being in popular American culture and being unsupported by the community that you were a part of. I mean, at that time I was on the board of directors for the local community center. I was in the food co-op. I was doing a lot of things to give back to that same community. I was assistant coach on the soccer team. I got railroaded into being the den mother because there were too many Cub Scouts and not enough dens. And then it turned out to be really great because Lars and his group of friends were my den, and they were all boys that I really loved and that were his friends for a long, long time. So that was really neat eventually, but in the beginning, it's not like I didn't have enough to do. I was a single mom with no central heat, and I had to split my own firewood, and I had to find someone to watch my daughter one night a week so I could go over to the community center and do the den mother activities with the kids there. It was weird. But yeah, so it was a community of support and love and honoring motherhood and honoring childhood and children as people and who they were, even, you know, as infants and toddlers. That was something I thought was so important about the camp, because if we want to create a new society where everyone is respected, honored, listened to, we have to do it ourselves. We have to set an example, and we have to start with how we are raising the children, because they're going to be the next generation. If we teach them by our example that this is the correct way to behave to other people, to listen to and respect them and honor them for who they are, if we practice that when we're dealing with infants and toddlers and children and teenagers, then the world becomes a better place while we're doing it, and it's an example for them. It's like, it's a circle. Like a child who is molested as a child becomes a perpetrator as an adult. We see this constantly. So a child who is loved, embraced by their community and listened to and valued becomes a parent who loves their children and values them, and it slowly builds. And that's what we were doing there, and that's what I felt from the bottom of my soul, that I was safe at the encampment. I was safe. I mean, until the zapping thing happened, there was no place on the planet that I was safer than there with my sisters, being valued for who I was, being completely free to not have to edit my personality or my behavior, to just be who I was there in that space, in that sacred space, special women's space. So it was powerful. It was a powerful place, a powerful time, a magical thing we all created together. I loved cooking in the outdoor kitchens. I really loved when there was that great big area that had the tin roof over it with the 3 sides of counters. I absolutely adored chopping up huge quantities of cabbage and serving them in giant metal bowls, and having women come and be so appreciative of the food. I remember Susan Gretz. Do you remember her?
Yes.
She died, but she came along the food line, and she picked a rice cake out of the container, and she looks at me right in the eye and she laughs and she goes, "Organic styrofoam," and takes a big bite out of it. So that was sweet and amazing. Yeah, I had a great time filling in the ditches and singing and walking on the land. Got a really wicked case of poison ivy once there on my wrists. From right as you went over the rise into Amazon Acres, there was some growing there. I remember that really spiffy car that was back there, which I actually insured on my own personal car insurance policy so that it could be the camp car. And then someone was working on it, and a key piece of, I don't know, the starter motor or something had been taken to go get a replacement part or something, and no one ever came back and fixed the car. So it was there, it was insured, we had plates for it, and then people who were working back there had left some tools, a shovel and a pickaxe in the backseat of the car, and so the boys came on the land, opened up the car, which of course was unlocked, took the tools, and smashed all the glass in the car, which then became so expensive that was more than the value of the car, that we couldn't afford to fix it, and eventually had it hauled off the land. But that was a beautiful old Ford. I can't remember. I remember what color it was, but I can't remember the model. But that just seemed to belong there, next to those shitters that I think were never finished. I did security back in Amazon Acres one time, and it was there was going to be a walk all the way around the base, and some other groups were coming to join the action, some groups from Rochester, and I ended up doing security in Amazon Acres that night before the walk around the base. And we had a fire going, and it was quite lovely. And then, just as the sun was starting to come up, the boys over in the guard tower over on the other side of the woods started saying rude things to us on their bullhorns. And I'm like, what a way to spoil a perfect night, We just had a great time singing, hanging out, there's stars, there's a fire, and then we have to deal with this crap. It's like, I guess that's why we're here, because of them. But, that's a bummer. Yeah. So, endless meetings. The sign in the kitchen, there's no maids in the revolution. The time I ended up sleeping in the pit one time, it was winter time, and I heard the rats in the kitchen, and I opened my eye and I'm looking in there and I see them springboarding across the counters and getting into some peanut butter that somebody had left out, and I'm like, wow. I mean, the whole thing about the rats, do you remember where the women didn't want to hurt the rats, so they built a special rat house out behind the house and put all nice enticing things that the rats might like to eat and little shelters for them and everything, did a ritual to try to lure the rats out of the house so they would go in the rat house so no one would have to kill them. That was so peace camp, that really was, we have to respect the rats and they have a right to life too, and let's, make a better world for them out here. And I don't think it was effective. I think that eventually the solution to the rats was to do better control of the food inside so that the containers couldn't be opened and there wasn't food left out on the counters. I think that turned out to be the solution, not the rat house, but it was so hard because different people had different levels of awareness about different aspects of life. So while you'd have someone who would be really into the kitchen being clean, you'd have someone else who'd come through, eat half of something, get caught in a conversation, walk off, and there's something with a bite out of it lying on the counter. And it was a peace camp. You couldn't tell somebody what to do. You couldn't say, don't leave your food on the counter, the rats will be in here. You just couldn't do it. It was like you could respectfully request that people not leave food on the counter because but you couldn't tell somebody not to do something. So yeah, it was cool. Yeah, that the No Maids in the Revolution was meant to shame you into behaving, but no one was going to tell you had to behave. I remember I took my chainsaw to the land one time, and Merry Christmas and I went out back to get our trees, which the boys had cut down. And it's like, well, if they cut our trees on our land, we're at least going to use them for firewood. So she and I lugged them out and loaded them in the back of her truck and brought them back to the land, and we cut them up and split them. Working together with women like that builds an incredible bond. It's like, if I saw her today, we would give each other a big hug, and it would be a deep, deep connection. And I haven't seen her for years. I have not seen her for years. And the same thing, was such a rush to see Woody last summer. And yeah, Jane Eyre, who I mostly heard about, I don't remember ever meeting her, but I heard so much about her, and then connecting with her last summer was like, yeah, we're Peace Camp women. It was great. So yeah, I think the relationships were strong, and in some cases I can't speak to the romances that started in flames and went down in flames, and but that was certainly swirling about too, and we were each changed. We were made stronger and freer by everything that happened at the encampment, who we were grew. You know, we burst out a little bit out of any self-imposed restrictions we may have had about our own self-concept. I mean, being challenged to do something that you think you personally can't do, and suddenly you find yourself doing it. It's empowering, and you're different, and you take that new self, who you are, out back into the world where you have to edit yourself, but you're a little bit different. I mean, I am such a thorn in the side of my boss, who is so relieved that I'm leaving, because I challenge his authority constantly, just by asking him simple questions. I mean, even about the grammar in his letters, he immediately goes into defensive mode because he feels, and to me, I'm not treating him any different than I treat all the rest of the women in our office. He's the only guy. And then there's 15 women that work there. And we all treat each other as peers. And I treat him the same way that I treat everyone else there. And he can't handle it. He's just not used to being expected to treat women like a peer. And that's just who I am. And I am like that because of the peace encampment. So yeah, it pisses him off. So yeah, relationships were strong and transforming, and one of the things before, when we were talking about Coral and when did it end, one of the discussions we had as we were deciding not to meet again was, and also what we were thinking, what are our strengths? Because here we are in certain circles of influence where the government and the military has much more power than we do, and they can physically harm us, they can kill us in their realms of expertise, in their realms of power. We had the circle of the media, which they had control over, and we were turned down, so we were unable to publicize what was going on through the traditional freedom of the press. That was denied to us. We had our physical safety was denied to us because they have power over the paradigm. The concept of going to our elected representatives, that clearly was not an option. But the sphere of influence that we had, that we thought was very powerful, that they could not even approach, they didn't even know the way to approach it, was in the magical spiritual realm. That we, within our songs, within our love for each other, within our group hugs, within the energy that we raised, the support that we had for each other, they couldn't perceive it, they couldn't penetrate it, they couldn't harm it. It was a way that we could go on working in the world that they wouldn't even be aware of, but that could still be incredibly powerful. For each of us to go out in the world, continue being who we were, lead by example, spread the love, be there for each other, and they couldn't touch it. They could not touch it. It was something beyond even their imagination. They couldn't think in those terms, and that was a great power that we had, and that in which we were safe, and in which we were safe from them. That they couldn't stop us in that magical spiritual realm. So we took consolation in that, and that we had built that, and that it was there and available to us, and that even as shitty as the world is now, with those guys in control, making war to make money, we could still continue to love children, to heal hurts, to help people recover from bad things that had happened to them, to be there for each other, to offer food, to nourish, to grow, to do the positive things that the world needs to be the place that the encampment envisioned, the place where consensus process could work, where everyone's fed, where no one's hungry, where everyone has clothes and shoes. That was our world, and we can still work for it, no matter how evil the superstructure is over us. We can still continue in that realm. It was a transformation, one person at a time, and then the energy got passed on. No, it was more like how in the mists of Avalon, One culture sees it as a monastery, and another culture sees the same island as the witches' sacred land. You know, that there are people in the same physical space at the same time who are experiencing that space differently because they have a different spiritual paradigm. So yeah, the Peace Camp was more than a piece of land, and it lives on in all of us and in our children. And
The land itself, when was the last time that you remember being there?
I went there in 1999 or 2000, and there was no one there. So I just wandered around, took some pictures, because I thought it would probably be the last time I was there. I wasn't sure what was going on with Women's Peace Land. I had a bit of money very briefly in, think about this, 1997. So I think I sent them $100, $300, something like that, because I had a little windfall of money that I knew I would never see again. But I wasn't even sure if I was still on the mailing list. So I went there and had my little moments and was sad that what it was not available to women that were coming there for the first time. But I could see that its time had passed, and maybe because the government found out better how to manage protesters, they learned that a wet blanket over the media or a control of the media, just, you know, if we have stories about Michael Jackson has boys at his estate, whatever it's called, then the story of, you know, women at the peace encampment doesn't get the bandwidth. So, you know, how many stupid things can we cook up about movie stars and their relationships so that there's no energy left in people's ability to concentrate, to focus on something as important as protest. I mean, some of my friends, some of my son's friends were at the World Trade Organization protest in Seattle, and just seeing what was in the media, which was very little, and then getting forwards from my son of emails from people who were there and what was happening was so different. And it was like, well, this is good because the internet is the future of how we can communicate among ourselves when the media has sold out. But at the same time, it was sort of like a non-event. I mean, the Pope went to Cuba, but that was the same weekend as Monica Lewinsky's dress. So what was in the press in the United States? Monica Lewinsky's dress. Now that's like super important, right? But the government has learned better how to manage us. They probably don't even need to zap us again. I mean, they've checked out those weapons. They checked them out during the first Gulf War, actually used them, found they were impractical. Because although they did a really good job at controlling the enemy combatants, they also injured the soldiers, and then there was an accountability demanded by the injured soldiers of why are we sick. So I think that they abandoned the use of those weapons, except, you know, in particular strike force situations, they might still be using them. So I think the time changed. I think that it would be hard for an encampment to happen again now. Personally, I'm taking a direction towards agriculture, and I see building community through a community garden and food co-op and food ordering clubs, and just trying to bring together people in my county whose needs are not being met by the current structures available to them, and to try to build community. I don't know where that's going to go, but I think building community around food is extremely important, because the mega industries are standardizing and ruining our food supplies. I mean, I think some of the sickness in our people today has to do with what's been done to the food, and I think that that's something that people need to rise up and reclaim. It's a different kind of war. It's war on the planet, again, to make money. I could see that as an organizing principle. I can see women being very actively involved in that. I don't know if a women's peace garden could arise, but it's one thing to think about. It might be my daughter and my daughter-in-law's generation's chance to build a magical space around a cause and see what they can do with it.